Good day, fellow YouTubers, and welcome back to part 2 of Debunking Feminist Theory. So, in a change to the scheduled video, I'll be dealing with the idea that gender is a social construct rather than rape culture. I decided to do this after a rather ridiculous conversation with somebody going by the name Ionicatheist, and I'll be linking to that conversation below. It's quite a fitting name for him, I think. The more discerning chemistry nerds out there have probably already noticed that his atheism seems to be considerably lacking electrons. Now, academic feminists like to say that gender is a social construct because it's politically advantageous for them to do so. They can then use this to justify calling any discrepancy where women appear to be worse off on the surface as discrimination, but when it comes to men in bad situations, they'll completely change the tune. Gender's no longer a social construct. It's because the male brain is a female brain which has been damaged by testosterone, or because the Y chromosome's defective. Of course, they can't have it both ways. Now, whilst there are aspects of gender which are social constructs, such as pink being a girl's colour, and many misconceptions and downright lies spread by society regarding the idea of sex and gender, there is a very real biological basis for it as well. This isn't to say that one gender is inherently better than another, just that there are different tendencies between the two populations. So Tim might be better at maths than John, and John might be better at English than Tim. That doesn't make one person superior to another. All it means is that they're different. Nor does this discredit individualism. I suspect that if it were possible to graph masculinity and femininity in the population, you would see something a little like this. Gender is non-binary. There's those who don't fit in with the normal range, and that's great. If a woman is capable of doing a masculine job, or vice versa, they're perfectly entitled to do so, and they shouldn't be forced into stereotypical gender roles if they aren't for them. It can be very hard to discern exactly how much difference is caused by upbringing and societal expectations, and how much is genetic, but both do play a part. When it comes to social constructionists and genetic determinists, I see both sides as equally bad when it comes to their extremes. The social constructionists, such as the genetic determinists, such as 8 Kill Snake, think that women are naturally just terrible people, and that this just can't be changed. This view is vile. Of course, women aren't terrible people, and even if they were, taking a fatalist viewpoint like this would make any form of activism completely pointless, and I outright reject any fatalistic viewpoints such as this. On the social constructionist side, pushing for equal representation in the way they do is going to cause more harm than good. They push people out of work or education purely on the basis of their biological sex. They lower the standards and productivity to get people into work, and it makes it so people are more likely to be in positions which they just aren't suited for. I'm going to play a short video clip from Manwomanmyth to demonstrate this.
At UCL, a London university, they say this. But why do they aim for an even balance of male and female students? The vast majority of women simply don't have the brains to do computer work. They certainly have intellect, just not technical intellect. And just as importantly, they don't have the desire to do technical work. It's that simple. You know this from all of your female friends and colleagues. Most women avoid technical matters like the plague.
Can you send someone to fix the printer? It's jammed. Thanks. Bye.
From hi-fi systems to computers to car trouble. If it's electronic or mechanical and it doesn't vibrate, women don't want to know. In the men's 100 meters, black men are the fastest in the world, and white men don't do anything like as well. For example, there were no white men in the 2008 Olympic final. Is this happening because white men are discriminated against in athletics? Are white sprinters oppressed? Or are certain black men simply faster than the rest? If we decide that not enough white men are winning races, what can we do about it? Do we limit the number of blacks that can compete? Do we offer special coaching and funding to white athletes only? Perhaps we should make black athletes wear rucksacks full of rocks. Of course you can't discriminate against black athletes in this way. That's racism, right? And here's where we meet the classic problem afflicting our society in the feminist age: the confusion between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. In a 100 metres race, all you can do is ensure that everyone starts at the same time, at the same place, and covers the same distance. You cannot control who wins, unless you start fixing the results. And this is precisely what's happening in British education. Universities choose to see it as discrimination that women are not studying computer science. And in order to alleviate this perceived discrimination against women, they proceed to commit actual discrimination against men. Let's say a computer science course has 100 places. 200 men apply for the course, and 50 women. If a university like UCL aims to have equal numbers of men and women on the course, then you can see the inevitable result. 100% of the women may be accommodated, but only 25% of the men. This the university sees as equality. It would actually be fairer to all applicants if the course ended up with 80 men and 20 women. That's 40% each. But this the university sees as discrimination against women. By aiming to have equal numbers of women on courses that simply don't appeal to them and that they aren't any good at, you don't achieve equality. What you achieve instead is discrimination against men, lower educational standards to get these women on the courses in the first place, and a shortage of high-quality professional workers in those fields when women quit 5 years into their careers to have children.
I've seen my best friend in Parliament, who was a young woman in her 30s, extremely capable. She wasn't willing to basically never see her young children, and so she left Parliament at the age of 38.
Everybody loses except for a growing group of women with mediocre technical abilities.
This is far more blunt than I'd like to put it, but I strongly agree with the message. Fixing results like this is only going to strengthen sexist attitudes. It also makes no sense to discriminate to prevent further discrimination. I don't think the balance is where it should be yet, but I certainly don't think it will ever be 50-50 in a meritocracy. Instead of taking a discriminatory top-down approach like these feminists are pushing for, they should be looking into the reasons why women don't feel drawn to technical roles in the first place. So let's take a look at gender differences we observe, but first an evolutionary explanation as to why we see those differences in the first place. Back in the days of our early human ancestors, women spent a very large proportion of their time pregnant and looking after children, whilst men hunted and did other dangerous jobs. Since population growth is heavily limited by the number of females, whereas the decline in male numbers doesn't heavily affect the long-term survival of the tribe, protecting women at the expense of men was encouraged. This wasn't sexism, this was a necessity at a time when most of your children wouldn't make it to 5 and the world in general was a lot more dangerous. Risk-taking was encouraged and sexually selected for in males, whereas in females the reverse was true. We still see huge remnants of this today. Risk-taking behaviour in rare cases leads to big payoffs, but has a very high chance of leading to disaster. This is one of the reasons men tend to have more high power positions but account for the vast majority of the homeless. This view of male disposability and female infantilisation has certainly been socialised into us, but I suspect it's heavily ingrained into our natural instincts as well. Of course, this isn't a necessity in today's society. Women aren't spending 80% of their adult lives pregnant, and we don't have to worry about going extinct due to lack of breeding. This instinct, like many of our other behaviours, was very beneficial in the past, but only serves to hinder us today. Hundreds of thousands, or even millions of years of sexual selection are bound to affect our evolution and leave vestiges of unnecessary behaviour. So let's have a look at the differences between men and women. So of course, genetically the difference is that men have one copy of the Y chromosome and one copy of the X chromosome, whereas women have no Y chromosome and 2 X chromosomes. Now this is quite a substantial difference. The difference is comparable to the difference between humans and chimpanzees. And of course, I'm not comparing either men or women to chimpanzees there. I'm just saying genetically we are quite different. To think that that genetic difference is only going to encode for sex organs, facial hair, blah blah blah, and not affect the brain at all is just utterly ridiculous. So first let's have a look at the physical differences between men and women. So men have on average 7 to 8 times more testosterone concentration in their blood plasma than women, and produce about 20 times more of the stuff daily. Males also weigh about 15% more than females and have less body fat. We're on average 6 inches taller, have a higher waist to hip ratio. We have a 40 to 50% increase in upper body strength and a 20 to 30% increase in lower body strength, and that's in comparison to total mass. If you're looking at lean mass, or you don't normalise for that, then the difference is a lot higher. It's about a 2/3 difference between men and women. So it was suggested by the Ionicatheist that testosterone does give men a natural head start. However, physical limits are not higher. Women can handle more physical and mental stress, so technically women have higher limits. That is bollocks. Complete and utter bollocks. So firstly, women suffer from more stress than men. They have more sick days than men, although looking after children does factor into that one a bit. As for taking more physical stress, well, women have more pain receptors than men, so they've obviously evolved that to avoid pain. Also, of course, men have been sexually selected to be better fighters and all of that kind of stuff, and of course we're naturally bigger and stronger, so that just makes no sense evolutionarily. So, but if that was the case, then what we would expect to see is that when we look at top athletes, there would be no difference between men and women, because after all, athletes are generally people who are at the very top, who are at the absolute peak of their physical ability. So here's the 100 meter times, top 100 men and women. Now the trend line of that doesn't look like the male line is going to get in line with the bottom of with the best female at any point soon. In fact, the 1,868th best male performance was 10.09, whereas the very best female performance was 10.49. So that's 0.4 seconds faster. For the 200 meters, the gap increases even more. For the 2,283rd best male performance, it was 20.39. For women, it was 21.34. That was the very best female performance. In the 400 meters, the 2,958th best male had a time of 45.2, whereas the very best woman was 47.6. The gap actually increases as you go up to higher distances as well. Let's have a look at some strength events. So for the shot put, the 9th best male performance was 22.62. For women, it was slightly better than that, 22.63. However, the male shot put weighs 7.26 kilograms and the female one weighs 4. For the hammer, the 985th best male performance was 80 meters. For women, the very best performance was 79.42, and there's the same difference between the weight of the hammer as there is with the shot put. As for weightlifting, men massively outperform women, even when you normalise for height, weight, and body cross-section. It's estimated that male champions have over 30% more contractive tissue than female champions. Let's have a closer look at the data then. So the first graph shows that there seems to be an optimum height for each weight group, which doesn't seem to vary between the sexes. When we look at body weight to divided by height cubed, we also seem to see that there doesn't seem to be much difference between the sexes there, as you'd expect from the first one. Once we look at weight lifted, though, there is an absolutely huge difference, and this difference doesn't disappear when you normalise for the body cross-section. So this indicates that men have a lot more muscle mass than women, as plenty of other studies have shown. The final one is quite interesting. It seems to indicate that for professional weightlifters at least, strength is proportional to height to the power of 2.16. When we're looking at average people, I can see how it's possible to argue that differences in upbringing can have a large effect, which could account for the gender difference. But when we're looking at top athletes, they are at or very close to their genetic limit. So unless you want to argue that female athletes are just lazy, you have no argument. If you were to tell a top female athlete, well, if you just tried harder, then you could be as good as any man, I can predict the two words which they'd throw back at you for suggesting that they just aren't trying hard enough. As for other physical differences, men also tend to have thicker skin, stronger bones. They tend to be slightly darker than females on average. They have a worse sense of smell for both differentiating between smells and detecting weaker odours. They have higher blood pressure, slower heartbeat, more red blood cells but less white blood cells, and they're also more likely to develop infectious diseases and succumb for longer periods. As for the brain, male brains tend to be between 10 and 15% heavier than female brains on average, although the brain to body mass ratio is generally quite equal. A study of army personnel in 1992 found that men had an average brain volume of 1442 cubic centimetres, whereas women had 1332. Both of these are larger than the male average, but there still seems to be a large gender gap there. Without looking into it further, though, I can't tell you that much about it. Perhaps more women are medics and more men are in the infantry, and so tend to be a lot larger. Females have the larger Wernicke's and Broca areas, areas which are responsible for language processing. In total and on average, females have a higher percentage of grey matter in comparison to males, and males have a higher percentage of white matter. Females generally have a faster blood flow to their brains and lose less brain tissue as they age than men do. The hippocampus is proven by imaging to be larger in women than men. The hippocampus is crucial for memory storage and spatial mapping of the physical environment. As for how this equates to IQ, men tend to perform better on maths and women tend to perform better on language, though the overall tests are designed to show an equal overall result. A few studies have also shown that men tend to perform better at younger ages, whilst women tend to perform better in later life, and males vary a lot more than females in their scores on average. Of course, diet and upbringing also have an effect on brain development, but we know that sex hormones do have an effect on the brain, so sex is going to have a non-zero effect. As for how all this affects employability, it's hard to say, but the amount is certainly non-zero, and the feminists pushing for equal representation based on discrimination against women have the burden of proof, which they have failed on every conceivable level. It's also worth noting that high testosterone and height are also highly correlated with positions of power. A survey of Fortune 500 CEOs' height in 2005 showed that they averaged 6 foot, 30% were over 6'2", compared with just 3.9% of the general population, and only 3% were under the national average height for men. Of the 43 US presidents, 18 were over 6 foot, and 40 were average height or above. Perhaps one of the reasons we see less women in politics is not direct discrimination based on sex, but indirect discrimination based on height. When we normalise the height, women are actually massively overrepresented. Anyway, I think I've rambled on for long enough as usual, so comment, rate, subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.